Welcome to another week of Fabrengen on the Sicha, Fabrengen on Air. This week we're going to be discussing the worldviews of Aaron and Moshe, which we'll get to later in the Sicha. The Sicha begins with a Rashi, and we're going to delve into it momentarily. Today we have the honor to have Rabbi Yonasan from Los Angeles, California. So Rabbi Yonasan is actually a Tucson native, went to the University of Arizona, went to yeshiva in Morristown, New Jersey, and today he lives in Los Angeles together with his wife and children. And he is part of a beautiful organization called Kamoicha, where they have a weekly Fabrengen, where they have a weekly class on Likutei Sichos, Project Likutei Sichos.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. It's good to see you. Good to be able to Fabreg.
So before we delve into the actual pasuk and Rashi and questions on how to learn Rashi, if you can give us a brief overview as to what's going on before we reach this verse of Vayishma Moshe, that Moshe heard and listened to Aaron. What is this conversation?
So basically we have, the inauguration of the Mishkan and the Miluyim and the 7-day process leading up to, the 8th day, which brings in the Shechina finally, comes down and they're able to go on with the rest of the inauguration of the Mishkan. And what happens is beforehand, Moshe tells, Aaron and his sons, which of the, there's different, karbanos that are being brought. There's the chatas, there's the oila, there's shlamim, there's, menachos, there's, the different karbanos that are being brought for different things. But in addition to that, there's also, first of all, Nachshon brings his, we read in Nisan, we read the carbon that each Nasi brings, a Nasi for each tribe. And so this was Rosh Chodesh Nisan, this was the first day, and this was the beginning of the process. So Nachshon from the tribe of Yehuda, he brings his, and so that also gets brought. And but in addition to that, even also it's Rosh Chodesh. So there's also the Chatas of Rosh Chodesh, the sin offering that is brought for the sin offering for Rosh Chodesh. So they bring the sacrifices. And the ones that are brought before the Shechina is brought down, they put the sacrifices and then they go into the Oil Moed, the tent of meeting. And there's an opinion that Moshe, goes over the bringing of the Keturis with Aaron in that session, and they daven to Hashem, and that the karbanos should be accepted. And so they come out, they bless the people. The people, bow and everything. It's, the first time that this is all happening. And so the sons, Nadav and Avihu, they know what comes after the Shechina comes, what comes after Hashem comes down and takes the karbanos. You go in and you do the keturis, you do the incense in the Holy of Holies. So they do that without having been instructed to do so. They do it, they had a zrizus, an alacrity to go and do this thing that they knew was supposed to happen, but they misstepped, they miscalculated, and the fire of Hashem comes and takes them by way of Neshikin. It's comes and takes them. They're still intact, but they've passed away. So as a result, they've done some sacrifices, and now this tragedy happens. And Moshe tells Aaron and his two surviving sons, Elazar and Isamar, that it has to go on. We have to continue the service. So they bring the others, but what he tells them is that because they are the Kahanim, he's the Kohen Gadol, and his two sons are going to be right there with him doing the same thing. That Hashem has told me that you're not going to be doing, don't let your hair go, don't tear your garments. So essentially not completely, going through the process of Avelis, of mourning. However, in that day, in that moment, when his sons passed away, they were in the status of aninus. They were ainanim, which is the mourning of the immediate day that of the passing and the burial, that first step, that first moment. And so as a result of being in that status, they were supposed to still go on with the process, and Moshe tells them that. So they say, okay, if the reason why we're supposed to continue on is for the inauguration, for the Miluyim, then all of the karbanos that are shaykh to that, obviously he wants us to keep it going. So we'll do everything that's related to that. But as it pertains to the chatas, for the Rosh Chodesh, that's something that's repeating. That's going to be the Doros, right? Kosher Doros. That's for the future. That's going to be forever. That's not necessarily just right now, Kadshe Shah, for this inauguration that happens once in a lifetime. So as a result, he comes to the conclusion, Aaron, that we'll partake of the Kadshim Shah, the Kadshe Shah, the Kadshim, the karbanos that are for this inauguration, like Moshe said, but the things that are supposed to be for us that don't have to do with the inauguration and are for future generations, we won't eat that. Which would be the halacha. So Moshe comes to Aaron and says, why did you burn the chatas? That was supposed to be, I told you. And, Moshe comes to Aaron about this. And he comes to Eliezer really, but Aaron answers and tells him that this is the decision I made and this is what it's based on. And, and so then it goes to the pasuk that the Sikha is about.
Beautiful. Okay, so that was a very good introduction to what's going on over here. Kache Shah, Kache L'Doros, and this pasuk is a continuation of Moshe hearing Aaron's point of view, his svara, and Moshe had a different svara, and now after he hears Aaron's svara, Aaron's rationale, Moshe says, "Vayishma." The Torah says, "Vayishma Moshe." Moshe heard, Moshe listened. Moshe accepted, Vayitav be'enov, and it was good in his eyes. He acknowledged this. And on this Rashi is really the beginning of the Sikha, is what we're going to explore in the beginning, is the Rashi. What does Rashi say? Rashi says, and on these words, we have Mefarshim, we have Gemara, we have Teres Kahanim, how to learn this Rashi, and some questions that the Rebbe will ask. So if you can briefly give us an overview on how to learn this Rashi, based on Mefarshim, based on Gemara, and then from there we'll ask the question that the Rebbe asks.
Yeah, so the pasuk says Vayishma Moshe in response to what Aaron says. He says Vayishma Moshe Vayita be'enov. And so Moshe heard this and it was good. And he appreciated it. So Rashi says on Rashi's Dibra Maskil is Vayita be'enov. That's what he's zeroing in on this pasuk is Vayita be'enov, that it was he appreciated it. And it says Rashi says Hoida, he acknowledges this, V'loi baish, and he wasn't embarrassed, Loimar, Loi shamati, saying, I didn't hear this. That's all Rashi gives us on that.
Right. So the Gemara fills in some gaps. How does the Gemara? How do we learn pshat from the Gemara on how to view this Rashi? Let's just delve into that.
So what's interesting is some of the Mefarshim, on Rashi, they notice the fact that he's taking from this Gemara. He seems to be taking the lashon from the Gemara, but sort of leaving out a piece, because what the Gemara itself says, it adds. It says Haida v'lei baish, right? He acknowledges but wasn't embarrassed. But then he goes on to say that v'loimar loy shamaiti, that I didn't hear. Ella shamai, rather, instead he says shamaiti v'shechachti, but I forgot. So the Gemara, yeah. So go ahead.
No, go.
Okay, so the Gemara is saying that it's a difference in understanding that sentence, basically. So Rashi leaving it out leads us to believe something completely different. And I'll say why. Because the Gemara, when he says that, when the Gemara says that that Moshe acknowledges but wasn't embarrassed, saying, I hadn't heard, the Gemara is suggesting that if he were embarrassed, he would have said, I didn't hear. Because there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I didn't hear. If Aaron had the right answer, then the way of not, showing that you're embarrassed, if you're embarrassed, you would say, oh, I didn't hear. Instead, he owns up to it. This is the Gemara. He owns up to it and says, you know what? I heard this, but I forgot. That's the Gemara. But when the way Rashi puts it, by leaving out that last piece of Ella, from Ella on, that he heard but forgot, it looks like he's suggesting that Rashi, or that Moshe rather, that Moshe accepted and acknowledged it, wasn't embarrassed to say that he forgot, or that he didn't hear it, rather.
Didn't hear, right.
So it's a difference. It changes the meaning.
Right, if Moshe heard it or not. So the Gemara learns that Shemativ Shechachti, that he heard but he forgot, and he wasn't embarrassed to say that. And from the words of Rashi, the Rashi doesn't include the word Shechachti, Shemativ Shechachti, and on that the Rebbe asks, Rashi is giving an insight for even for a 5-year-old to be able to understand what the pasuk is saying. And in order to understand what the pasuk is saying, a key important component is knowing if he heard it and forgot it, or if he never heard it, if he never heard it at all. So Rashi would have wrote that in. Rashi would have wrote that clearly in Rashi. So because based on this, the Rebbe asks that it must be that Rashi has to be learning it different than the way the Gemara learns it. And if you could actually a little bit later, I think in Sif Dalid, the Rebbe gives us insight into the wording of the pasuk in Pshut Shal Mikra as to why Rashi is not learning like the Gemara. So if you can, the Rebbe breaks it down into three problems that you have in the actual verse if you base it on the way the Gemara learns. So if you could share some insight into that.
Sure. So first of all, like you said, Rashi's explaining this to the Chams Mikra, the child. So it also is Pshut Shal Mikra. So it can't, when Rashi quotes a Gemara or a Medrash or something like that, it has to also be that it fits perfectly with Pshut Shal Mikra. So the Gemara seems like it might be, interpreting or understanding the situation a certain way, but Rashi has to focus on Pshut Shal Mikra and what makes sense Pshut Shal Mikra. So the first thing that so Rashi has certain issues with it because of it being Pshut Shal Mikra. So first of all, he says, what's the shevach? What's the praise in saying that Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't embarrassed, so he didn't lie? That's the assumption. That's the implication. He wasn't embarrassed, which means he wasn't embarrassed, and he might have said, I didn't hear it. Instead, he owned up and said, we're saying this about Moshe Rabbeinu? Rashi, so this is the first problem, right? Why are we saying that Rashi, or that Moshe Rabbeinu, Chas v'Shalom, would ever say something besides the truth? The second thing is, if Moshe had heard this before, why is he saying it pleased him? This is from Hashem. He already heard it, especially. Why is it Vayitav Be'einav, right? And so, in addition to that, so the biggest problem with the Vayitav Be'einav is that why then doesn't it say it was pleasing to Hashem, right? Be'enei Hashem.
Right.
Why Moshe? Why is that Moshe?
Right. It would have said Vayitav Be'enei Hashem.
Right.
If that's pshat. So from this, we have from this the Rebbe concludes that we have a major. There's Iker Chaser Min HaSefer. If this was what Rashi meant, he would have said that clearly. And therefore, we must learn Rashi kipshutai, literally, that loy shama, he didn't hear it. So if you could give us, so just to conclude, so now, Taka, how do we learn Rashi? Based on this, how do we conclude and how do we learn Rashi?
So one of the things that is brought in regards to this, and I think it's in some of the Mefarshim, is they try to make sense of the word Vayishma that Moshe had heard. So I think it's the Divrei David, who wrote the Taz, points out that Vayishma is almost an extra word because Vayita be'enav he's acknowledging or accepting and appreciating. So Vayishma is either it's an extra word or it's coming to show us Vayishma Moshe, he had heard it, right? So he's trying to make sense of these two sections, these two pieces of this pasuk. So the problem is then it should be Shama,
right?
That it should be heard. I had heard, right? But so the real explanation for Vayishma is, as he uses it elsewhere, is Shamata l'kol ishtecha, when Hashem tells about Adam Arishan that he listened to his wife, and also with Yosef when his brothers are talking, and it says Shomeya Yosef, that Yosef heard. That it doesn't just mean heard; it means listened and understood, right, and accepted. So it seemingly would be kind of superfluous to say Vayishma Moshe and Vayita be'enav, because really the breakdown, it doesn't say Shama, it says Vayishma, meaning he heard it now in this situation, right, not before. So you can't say, so Rashi specifically doesn't accept that, and it's also he mentions that the Dibra Maskul is not on the Vayishma, that is on the Vayita be'enav. So this fact that of the Shama and Vayishma of listening that's the acceptance. That's where he accepts it, and then Vayita be'enav, and that he enjoyed it, or he appreciated it, and that he wasn't embarrassed is really a reference to the fact that he then shared that, he expressed it publicly, that he went and told people about this beautiful svara of his brother.
Right. So that means that Vayishma Moshe, that's enough. Vayita be'enav is what Rashi is focusing on. Why does Rashi caption Vayitav be'enav? What's the chiddush in Vayitav be'enav? Vayishma Moshe, he acknowledged it, he accepted it. As we know, Shema, listen, means that you're mekabel, and with das. So we already have the full acceptance from Moshe. What's Vayitav be'enav? And that Rashi comes and says that there was another thing over here. There's another nekuda that Moshe did. He was so impressed, and he was so taken by his brother Aaron that he went and he spread the news about this take of Aaron. He shared it with others. Okay, so from here the Rebbe goes on to Yenish al Teira in Sif Zayin, and this is really an amazing part of the Sikha, the way the Rebbe speaks about the two views. Moshe's what's at Moshe's core, what's Moshe's worldview, and what's Aaron's worldview. And there's actually other sichos where the Rebbe talks about this, which we're going to get into. But before we go into Emes and Aaron, the Rebbe asks a question. This whole discussion with Moshe and Aaron it's a seichel discussion. It's a logical discussion, and Moshe had his svara and Aaron had his svara. So what exactly happened over here? That first Moshe saw it from one angle, from one perspective, and then Aaron shared his perspective, and then Moshe changed his perspective. Mm-hmm. What's going on over here? First, the first part is why are they? What's the svaras hamachlokes? Why are they following a certain way of thinking? What's the reason for that way of thinking? Number one. Number two, what changed when Aaron shared his view that Moshe now is on board with Aaron? So if you could share with us the Emes and Aaron and Zayin, the way the Rebbe beautifully explains the difference of Moshe and Aaron.
Absolutely. And one of the things that kind of, when I first started learning sichas, that blew me away was the way that the Rebbe would kind of show that the way to really truly understand whether it be a Rashi or a Rambam or anything like that, that it's through Pnimius Torah that you can actually understand it. Because of the lumdus, and he brings all these different mafarshim and explanations and answers, and then points out maybe certain things that then don't jive with the other explanations, or even a simple explanation was if it's regarding Rashi like us, and then brings the Pnimius Torah, and then it all makes sense. Yeah. And it's so in classic fashion, he does this here with understanding the difference between the two svaras based on understanding the difference between the two individuals, like you said. So Moshe represents Emes, right? The Moshe is Emes, which is truth. And truth is unchanging. Truth is truth. Truth is what it is now, what it is later, what it was before, what it is up, what it is down. Truth is truth. And that's Moshe. So his opinion on the Kodshe, on the Kodshe Daughters and the Kodshe Shah is that it's the same. It's Kodshim. So it's the same. It's now and it's forever. Right. However, Aaron is Chesed. Aaron is Chesed, right? The Oyev Shalom, Redev Shalom, Oyev Esabriyas, Karvan the Torah, that he loved peace, he pursued peace and loved people who they're even people whose only redeeming quality is that they were created by Hashem. He loved them too, and he drew them into Torah through this love. So he is Chesed, and the fact that that's what represents this, this dynamic of Aaron shows that his explanation or his svara on there being a difference between Kadshe Shah and Kadshe L'Deres shows that Chesed is about the recipient and making the recipient happy, or whatever it is that you're trying to give to the recipient is based on the recipient. The recipient has to be, the information or the transfer has to be done in a way that is tailored for the recipient in a certain way, right? So the Emes has to get to the recipient, right? So it's still Emes, but it's by way of being tailored for the recipient. Therefore, he saw the difference between Kodshe Shah and Kodshe Daughters. Things,
right? Right. It's interesting. Aleph Mem Tuf is the beginning of the Aleph base. Aleph Mem is the middle. Tuf is the end. So MS, truth, is in all times, all places, and in all circumstances.
Yeah.
We actually see this with, let's say, for example, now we're almost at the Yom Tov of Pesach. So you can go anywhere in the world and you find a Seder. Chabad has a starim everywhere. But number two, every Seder that you go to in all types of Jews who grew up in all different type of places, you're going to see the emes of Yiddishkeit, how we keep Pesach exactly the way we kept Pesach thousands of years before. We still keep it in all times, in all places, and in all circumstances. There's another inyan of emes. You find it in oil. When the Rebbe spoke about sichos during Hanukkah, what's the DNA of oil, the emes of oil never mixes. So you could take any type of substance or liquid, and the oil will always rise to the top. So the emes of oil is that it rises to the top and it doesn't mix with any other waters. Actually, I want to share a quick story that very much connects to the Sikha later on as well, of the tandem of Moshe and Aaron, how they work together, which we'll get to soon, but I think it's already negea here. So the Mittel Rebbe was doing yichidus, private audiences with Chassidim, that on a certain day, and after one Chassid left, he told Chassidim, he closed his door and he stayed in his room, in his yichidus room, for many, many hours. And the Chassidim outside the door heard the Rebbe crying and davening and weeping. And the Rebbe came out, the Mittel Rebbe came out, and he was very weak for a few days. A few days later, one of the elder Chassidim approached the Mittel Rebbe and said, what happened? So the Mittel Rebbe said that, what is the yichidus? What is this moment of a Rebbe and a Chassid? This moment is that the Rebbe wants to help the Chassid. So the person shares his spiritual illness, where he's struggling. And in order for the Rebbe to help the person, the Rebbe must find in himself some sort of resemblance of what the person is struggling with, then see how to fix it in himself, and then advise the chassids. But this person that day, this person came with an extremely terrible spiritual illness, and the Mittel Rebbe said, if the Eibishter sent me this chassid, it's Ashkacha Pratis, that this chassid is coming to me. And if this chassid is coming to me, then I must have some sort of a harala, of a resemblance, of a small something, minute something of this, of what this chassid is struggling with. And it shook me to my core. This inyan shook me to my core. And I began doing tshuva. I began doing tshuva because of this incident. And that weakened the Mittel Rebbe. So from this story, you see the dynamic of the relationship of a Rebbe, like a Moshe and Aaron, that the Rebbe is mislabesh, in clothes himself into the mata, into the person where that person is, to the extent that the Mittel Rebbe had to find something that resembled what the chassid is going through, and then help the chassid. Which this is very much how involved, and this is Aaron Chesed, to see the chassid as wholesome and complete and connected and holy. So just a story.
It's a great story, and it, like you said, that it kind of touches on something later. You're absolutely right. That's the fact that it's the Mittel Rebbe. He was the Moshe Rabbeinu, and he was Emes, and he had to. The whole inyan of Yechidus is exactly what the Sikha is talking about. The fact that while there's the two different personalities we have, of Moshe being Emes, and the next Sif, he goes on to say that he's the Shemini the Malka, that Moshe is he escorts the king, and Aaron is the Shemini the Matronisa of the bride, which is the Jewish people. That these are two kind of, Moshe brings down Emes, and Aaron is trying to elevate the people who are on this lower level. And by Moshe accepting Aaron's svara, which is the svara of Chesed, it doesn't only validate this svara as being the svara as it exists in the svara of Chesed, but it also shows an acceptance and an acknowledgement that even in Midas Emes, that this is the proper way. And that's the Rebbe. That's the Rebbe is having this, is being both Emes and Chesed, and having that story is exactly that, which is where it goes, where the Sikha develops,
right? Where it goes next, which later on in Tess, there's another major nakuda here in this Sikha that I very much resonate, and gives us a certain approach to Yiddishkeit, which is very much associated with Shlichus and Chassidus, and really Der Ashvi, our generation. The Rebbe, and really ties back into Kachi Shah and Kachi Deires, where you have karbanis of the moment. In other words, you have a connection of the moment. There's not gonna be another spiritual experience like this, which ties into the idea of we have these awakenings that are momentarily, and do they mean anything? Does an inspiration in the moment mean anything? Or if a person does only a certain amount of mitzvahs and not other mitzvahs, so to say, they're not completely dedicated, which we'll get to in the end of the Sikha as well, on how a person should view himself. But is that holy? Is that an inyan of Bligvol? The Rebbe gives an example in Tanya of a Beinoni, that when does a Beinoni reach the highest level? When is it? That's only during davening. After davening, he goes back. So it's Kache Shah. So we see openly, but yet it's real. So if you could elaborate a little bit on the difference between a tzaddik and a Beinoni, a tzaddik and a Baal Tshuva, really, on how this inyan plays in.
Yeah, it's great. He brings this, from the Tanya about the Aveda of a tzaddik, which is pure emes all the time. Or the tzaddik is just firing at that cylinder constantly. So if that's emes, just like we learned earlier, emes is emes. It's emes before, it's emes later, it's emes now. Like you said, aleph mem tes, or tough rather. Emes is constant. It's consistent. So if emes is consistent in the way of emes, of understanding it through the lens of emes, you would think that anything inconsistent is hebech emes. And so he points out that that's not necessarily true, and he brings the Beinoni, that a Beinoni has moments where they're on fire, and moments where they may not be inspired. They're still living righteously, obviously, and the Tanya obviously goes into what a Beinoni's avodah, or what a Beinoni's actions look like. But in terms of the avodah, the fact is that the inspiration, waxes and wanes. It comes and goes, and points out that by way of, I don't know if you wanted to go doing the Shema or the Me'adecha.
We're going to go there. We're going to go there.
Okay.
Sure. But in the next paragraph, this very fascinating insight. In other words, what's the raya? What's the proof that this is emes? So the answer is that there's no such thing as any truth outside of Hashem. That means a nivra, a creation. What's a creation? All of creation is just an expression of Hashem. That means if there is a moment where a person has a godly experience, you must say that's the Eibishter involved in that moment with the creation. That's the raya. So therefore, it's emes. Even though it's just it's a moment of emes, but you must say that moment is influenced and inspired by Hashem. And there, let's get into Moedecha. What's Pshat Moedecha? If you could share.
So from Moedecha, that it's Moed Shelcha, that he breaks down that Moedecha, right, with your might, with all your might, your ability. And the fact is that, like you said, if you see emes, you're seeing the emes of Hashem, because Hashem is the only true emes. So if you're seeing something that's emes, that's what it is. So a person who's not a tzaddik, who's not always tapped in, they're still able to tap in to the emes. And so how can a person who is inconsistent, and seemingly, if inconsistency is not emes, how can they ever have emes? It's because just like emes is bli gvul, so a person has to tap into their own bli gvul, and everybody's bli gvul is a different level, is a different thing. Right. So this person, so me'oidecha, me'oid shelcha, your might, your bli gvul taps into the only true bli gvul, which is Hashem, and brings that down. So when you see somebody else's bli gvul, or if you see your own bli gvul, or my own bli gvul, that you're seeing Hashem.
Yeah.
The only true bli gvul.
Yeah. Which is another amazing vart, because every moment, it's the Rebbe explains the difference between doing something all of the time versus doing something temporarily, and the beauty of temporary, doing something just for a moment, embracing that truth in that moment, which is an unbelievable insight. And in Moedecha, don't look at somebody else, how they're doing a bli gvul moment. Maybe your bli gvul moment is their gvul moment. You don't know. Your bli gvul could be somebody else's gvul. But if you tap into your bli gvul, which could be not so big for somebody else, you're going to open the floodgates of the Eibishter milmayla lamata for the Eibishter to share with you his bli gvul.
Exactly.
It's interesting. In Yud Aleph, the Rebbe explains that Moshe is Atzilus. And Atzilus plays two roles. There's Atzilus, as Atzilus is disconnected from the world. It's a godly world. It's not a world of creation. It's a world that is consumed by the Eibishter, where the Eibishter is revealed. But then there's Atzilus, for what the purpose of Atzilus is for, is to make a dirlei sparich. And if you can, and if you can elaborate on that, how that plays with Shushvina de Malta, with Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron, and why Aaron? Let's go back to the original question: why Moshe? What was this discussion of Moshe and Aaron, and why did Moshe, based on this explanation of Atzilus, the two components of Atzilus, the two components of Moshe, why Moshe changed his mind and agreed with Aaron?
So yeah, this was, just to I kind of want to mention the thing that you said before about the Bli Gvul, that kind of to own your own Bli Gvul is a big deal. I think one of the things that it was impressed me about Tanya, or got me drawn to Tanya, was its truth. It's so true, and it's sometimes an uncomfortable truth to really look at yourself and think, where am I holding? But what's so great about that is there's a responsibility with that, and also it gives you the ability to kind of analyze what's next, to analyze what you should be doing, and when you're realistic with yourself, you're able to kind of see beyond where you're holding and what's next, and you're also able to be proud of where you are, and so when Moshe, who is Atzilus, and represents this as Shushvina de Malka, he represents the bringing down of Emes from Atzilus, the world of Atzilus, where it says that Hashem and all of his attributes in Atzilus are one. There's no distinction. So we're talking about just pure godliness. True Bli Gvul Emes, like we said before, is in Atzilus, and that's where Moshe Rabbeinu is drawing down from and into this world. The reality is, so there's Atzilus as it exists for itself. Atzilus has its existence and its reality. But as we know from Basilagani and from all the different things that are paramount in the that are paramount in our understanding of kind of what the importance of the world and in the different I guess layers of what that means, that the ultimate purpose was for this physical world, right? That the Shekhinah was here and that this is the purpose. And the proof of that is there's nothing beyond this world. Everything is above this world. Everything is a preface for this world, and this world is the end result. So the importance is here on this world. And Moshe acknowledging that and appreciating that is what Vayiktiv Be'einav means. Is that it's not just that Moshe appreciated what his svara was. He appreciated what this means in a bigger scale. He appreciated what that represents for both he and Aaron, the svara, but also what it means in the grand scheme of all of existence.
Beautiful. Let's go to the Hayra in Yud Beis, Sif Yud Beis, how the Rebbe lays out how a Yid should look at himself, should view himself. A Jew must view himself that he has the full potential to be Emes. He or she could be Bli Gvul at the highest level from a Moshe perspective. But when you view another Yid, you should have the Aaron. You should have the Aaron perspective on viewing another Yid. For you, you have to see yourself to be the best you can in all places, in all times, in all circumstances, and to live up to that high standard. But when you look at another Yid and when you engage with another Yid, you should look at them the way Aaron. You should get down to their level, connect with them where they are. And it's interesting because in a certain way, even the first part where the Rebbe says that yourself, you should look at yourself from the highest level, but that's why we also have a Rebbe, like back in the story, the Rebbe gets down to our level to help us reach the level of Ani Havai Leishonisi, so that we always have somebody that's outside of us that sees us exactly for where we are, that shares that Aaron inside of us, But we ourselves, from a perspective of ourselves, we have to look at ourselves from the Moshe, from the Emes perspective.
Yeah, and part of that, the fact that the pasuk goes on, Ani Avai Shanisi, it goes on to say, V'atem b'nei Yaakov. This is also shaykh to you. You have Hashem in you. Neshama is a chelek elokam mamish. You have within you, like you said, this bleak gvul that comes from Hashem because you have Hashem, and you're able to tap into that. And that's what's going on in terms of yourself. Is it says a person is supposed to see their own avodah anshinui without any change, that they are consistent, and you're supposed to hold yourself to that madrega. At least that's your intention. But when you deal with people who are on, maybe holding in a different place, that it's important that you treat them like Aaron, be as a disciple of Aaron, right? Learn from Aaron, right. and follow that model of loving people and bringing them the Torah that way. And the fact that a person is supposed to have both is also, the Rabbi I think he said earlier in the Sikha about the fact that when it says that Aaron, who was Chesed, is, Makarvan the Torah, brings his people to Torah, that the Torah is called Torah's Moshe. So that even Chesed is also shaykh to this level of Moshe that goes into that Vayitav Be'enav, but specifically as it pertains to the Hayrah for our Avodah, is that we hold ourselves in this level of Emes, but recognizing that from that place of Emes, we go out and treat others with Chesed, and that it's the Chesed and that love that comes from Chesed, that Ava, that'll bring people to Torah, to Hashem.
Beautiful, Rabbi Yonasan. When Emes and Chesed embrace, we accomplish Nisava HaKadosh Baruch Hu is that can happen.